Lyndon, could you explain the concept of democratization of leadership?
Yeah. So democratization of leadership is, to us, means making leadership development available and accessible to all people in the world. And we believe that leadership has traditionally been about people at the top of organizations, at the top of governments, at the top of society. But there are all people in the world who reside, who are mainly poor, who might not be as educated, and they are also leaders because they are leaders of their own lives, and they're leaders in their families, and they're leaders in their communities. And sometimes they're the best equipped to say what needs to happen for them. So what we are trying to do is actually make leadership development a bottom-up activity, not just a top-down activity, because it is about empowering people to take hold of their lives, to claim their own futures. And by virtue of doing that, we think that we will change society, because when people at large, claim their own futures, we will change what happens in our world.
In your opinion, how does development of leadership in women impact families, organizations, and society?
So developing women is very, very important. In most of the world, men control things, and women don't have much power, and oftentimes if they work, they get less income as well. But there's something fundamentally different that happens when women are given leadership roles, when they have power. So in many countries, when men earn income, they might spend it on themselves, on gambling, maybe drinking. Not as much money goes towards the families. And we found all over the world that when women make income, they will bring it back home to their families. The children get education, there's better health, there's better food for the families, and the life of that family changes. So very fundamentally, actually investing in women and girls can actually transform society in very different ways.
What do women from different continents, different religions and social situations share as common traits in leadership?
So we found that there are some fairly common patterns in women's leadership, that we think that women think about life in a more holistic fashion. So it's not only professional and personal advancement, of course, but they think a lot about their families and they think a lot about their communities. So women have a very holistic point of view. And I think women are also very much connected to other people. So again, you find less individualistic traits, but more about community and connection. So women, for instance, their leadership models are based on actually connecting and supporting each other. And it's the kind of leadership, I would say, that is needed more in our world, because oftentimes if we contrast the two, between the kind of leadership that men have, which might be more individualistic about their own futures, and if you look at women who are thinking about things more holistically and are thinking about how we can all better our own lives, our communities, you have the kind of leadership we need in the world.
According to your experience, what are women's most common strengths in leadership?
I think women's strengths in leadership are some of the issues that they are actually good at connecting with each other, at building relationships, because they're less individualistic. You can say that women have a higher degree of emotional intelligence oftentimes, that you can say that they represent the ability to be more empathetic, right? And this is again some of the values that we think are very important. So when we found, and we've done research in America, we found that even women who sometimes are not involved in the workforce, who might be taking care of families, they actually are developing very good leadership skills. And when they come into the workforce, into companies, they have the kinds of social skills that are very important in companies. They're able to deal with a lot of complexity because they're juggling many different tasks. So actually women can actually be very good leaders even if they're homemakers.
What are their most common development needs?
So for women, I think what we find is that there tends to be a lack of confidence oftentimes, that even women, even when they're quite influential in companies, they suffer from a lack of confidence about themselves. So oftentimes what we need to do is first kind of help women feel much more confident, to find their voice. And we think it's very fundamental that they claim their own power, because when you're in a place where you might be disempowered, you cannot expect oftentimes the elite people to say, okay, we want you to be an equal. women have to find their voice, they have to create their vision, and they have to claim their power.
What should social organizations, universities, and government institutions do to develop leadership in women, for women in the grassroots?
I think it's very important because this is a population typically that doesn't get seen as being leaders, and it doesn't get developed in terms of leadership capacity. If you go to villages and communities, it's often the men who are selected to get developed for their leadership skills. But because of all the things that we've talked about, because of the difference between women and how they see the world, that if we think that if we empower them to make decisions for communities, they will make some very different choices, and they are more likely to build better futures for their families, better education and health systems, and they're probably likely to build stronger communities. So actually empowering women at the grassroots who are dealing with everyday existence, the most vital things in the world, by empowering them, they're going to change the priorities of where the resources go, what decisions get made.
Related to that, in order to be able to bring this to grassroots women, could you explain to us what you're doing in order to develop more possibilities to leadership development tools and methodology?
So a lot of what we're doing actually is using knowledge that the Center has created from research over about 40-some years of doing work. But as we go into communities around the world, what we are starting to do is actually co-create with various communities, with various populations. So we take what we have, but we actually join it with the knowledge that people have in local communities, so it represents their own realities, their own voices, their own needs as well. So we tend not to really come in as experts and say this is what you need, but rather we come in and say, well, we have some knowledge, how can this be useful to you, and how can we create something that is truly about what you want. And really what we want to then do is actually work with local organizations like Comunidad Mujer to actually partner with them so that we can share what we know and actually bring practices that we've learned from all over the world so that we can work together in local context. So it's very important for us to actually connect with great organizations that care about the future of women.
How relevant is development of the community and networking connections, as you call it in your model, for women's leadership?
It's very fundamental because we've talked about how women sometimes lack confidence, but when women can stand together, they can be quite powerful. In places like India, they have a model that's called women's self-help groups. And this is an idea of actually giving small loans to women, but the loans are usually made as a group. And so that's one element of it. But what happens is that you create a social network of women who get to know each other. And if one woman could be beaten up by her husband or is being abused, all the women will stand together and stand up for her rights. So you cannot then divide them. So the connections are very important, because when women stand together, they're at least half the population, and how can you ignore that?
Finally, what is the value of mentoring in leadership development?
So I think mentoring is very important for a couple of reasons. One is that sometimes there is a pattern when women who are successful, they may not do as much to help other women also succeed, that they can think that they have to be like one of the men. So it's important to remind women about the nature that there are other women who could benefit from what they've learned along the way. So for women to help other women is very important. And it's also important, as we think about, for women to be peer mentors, to actually, even if we're together at the same level or we're equals, that we actually support each other. So much of what we do is that we can feel alone in our situations and our challenges. But when we talk to other people, we can find that they can support us, they can give us fresh ideas, but they can also tell us different ways to think. When we are trapped in our problems, it's because we're thinking about it in a certain way. And when we talk to somebody, they can give us fresh ideas that are important. So mentoring is very important. But there's also a way to do mentoring that we think is important, that it is not so much about advice giving, but it is very much about listening and asking questions. So some of what we do in mentoring training is actually to build some of the skills to enable people to become good mentors. And what's really great about mentoring is that Unlike things like coaching sometimes, which are seen as more expert models, there's the coach who's helping somebody. Mentoring can be, as I've said, a peer-to-peer exchange. And when you learn how to be a mentor, you can be a mentor to other women, and those women can learn how to be mentors, and they can be mentors to other women. So it's a process that can actually ripple through society. It doesn't have to cost money. And every day in our lives, we can be mentors who can help other people grow.
One last question. How can women be authentic leaders in a world that is decided for at least for a big part of it by men?
I think it's an important question, and I think you've seen a pattern sometimes in companies where, in the past, say in America, that women, to be successful, they thought they had to act like men. But now, when you see many more women coming into leadership roles, they're actually bringing a more authentic style of leadership, which is greatly appreciated in organizations. So I think a first pattern of that is really for women to get to know themselves, know who they are, what makes them strong, and then feel confident that what they are and who they are has a lot of value, that they don't have to be like men. By women being women, we will bring a lot more to leadership than women trying to replicate what men have not done a good job at.
Could you give a final advice to all women who want to make a change in Chile about how to go with it?
Yeah, so if I have some advice about women in Chile, it is that I see from this experience that we've had here this morning, some very strong, very capable, and very vital women. And to some degree, I'm a little bit puzzled about what's happening in Chile, why women feel less enfranchised. So I think what women need to do is really start to claim their power and use their connections to say, well, what do we want to create, and start to work together. Unity is the most important thing. And if women can join together, a lot of great things are possible, and Chile will benefit.
Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.